The Antiquities Act authorized the U.S. presidents to preserve and reserve historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of lesser historic or scientific interest on lands owned or controlled by the United States as national monuments. And nearly a quarter of the units currently in the national park system originated in whole or in part because of the Antiquities Act. Because of this act and the founding of the Yellowstone National Park during his administration, President Theodore Roosevelt is often credited with creating the national park system. But Woodrow Wilson officially established the NPS in 1916. Additionally, President Franklin Roosevelt greatly expanded the National Park Service's jurisdiction in 1933 when all military parks, 15 national monuments, the national capital parks, and nearly 40 historical areas in the eastern half of the country were added to the department's oversight. The NPS plays a critical role in preserving and memorializing both well-known and less recalled contributions to American history. The youngest Clark brother, William, is widely remembered for a cross-country journey that Thomas Jefferson sent him on in 1804, and the NPS recounts this path with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. However, as in most families, the little brother would be nothing without the big brother. The George Rogers Clark National Historic Park commemorates the military strategy and battles on the Indiana frontier, which were critical wins for the Americans during the Revolution, making sure that even if it's missing from most textbooks, the eldest brother's contribution to the United States founding is not lost to history. The NPS epitomizes George Rogers' words that have been inscribed upon his memorial. If a country is not worth protecting, it is not worth claiming. The National Park Service claims and protects 417 people, events, and places, including the life and legacy of President Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest people of our nation. And thanks to the NPS, one can follow Lincoln's life almost through his literal footsteps, as well as explore the lasting effect he had on our nation. The NPS reports that the total 2016 visitor count across the entire national park system was 331 million people. My family can be counted as part of this statistic. 5 states memorialize the life of Abraham Lincoln. The NPS Lincoln Journey begins at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historic Site in Knob Creek, Kentucky. This park encompasses 2 distinct geographic sites. The Central Memorial at Sinking Spring includes a monument that houses a replica cabin. Here, visitors can peek into the life of the Lincoln family at Sinking Springs Farm. In a cabin just like the one housed here, Nancy Lincoln gave birth to her second son, Abraham, on February 12, 1809. Clearly identified in the land records, this pit where Lincoln's family almost certainly drew their water from is also preserved in the park. Protected under the care of the Lincoln Birthplace is Knob Creek Farm, located about 10 miles from Sinking Spring. In 1811, the Lincoln family moved to Knob Creek Farm, remaining there for about 5 years. Although the original cabin was torn down by the Gallagher family not long after the Lincolns left, a modern-day recreation shows what amenities the Lincoln family most likely had. Our next stop is the Lincoln Boyhood National Historic Site in Lincoln City, Indiana. In 1817, a land dispute forced the Lincolns to move to Perry County, Indiana, approximately 80 miles northwest of Knob Creek. There, the family squatted on public land to scrape out a living in a crude shelter, hunting game and farming a small plot, which Abraham's father was eventually able to buy. A replica cabin and living historical farm have been placed roughly where the Lincolns originally stood, and the footprint of the original cabin is outlined in stone. While Abraham Lincoln received only a few months of formal education, he was an avid learner and a voracious reader. Standing in the replica cabin, one can imagine him curled up next to the fire. Also preserved here is the family cemetery where both Lincoln's mother and sister are laid to rest. Nestled in the woods of this site is the Trail of 12 Stones that marks milestones in Lincoln's life. Among them are the foundation stones where a young Lincoln lived and worked, a stone from Anderson Cottage where Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in September of 1862, and a piece from the area of the U.S. Capitol building where Lincoln gave his inaugural speeches. An original foundation stone from his Hodgenville, Kentucky birthplace, and a chunk of granite from his Springfield, Illinois grave anchor the trail. In March 1830, 22-year-old Abraham Lincoln struck out on his own. After being admitted to the bar in 1837, Lincoln moved to Springfield, Illinois, and eventually married Mary Todd of Lexington, Kentucky, on November 4, 1842. As a side note, Lincoln enthusiasts may visit the Todd home in Lexington, Kentucky, but this site is owned by a private foundation, not the NPS. For the next year and a half, the newlyweds lived in rented rooms, where their first son, Robert Todd, was born. In 1844, Lincoln spent $1,500 to purchase the only home he ever owned. This home is now the centerpiece of the Lincoln Home National Historic Site. Built in 1839, the house was originally a one-story cottage with 2 attic rooms. Between 1846 and 1855, both the family and the home expanded. Lincoln enlarged the house to 12 rooms and 2 full stories to accommodate 3 more sons. Here, one can literally walk in Lincoln's footsteps throughout the home, and even attempt to gaze at his own reflection in the shaving mirror hanging in Lincoln's bedroom. Though there was great joy in this house, especially the formal parlor where Abe was informed he would become our nation's 16th president, the home saw many sad times as well. When young Edward died in the back parlor in 1850. In 1861, Lincoln departed from the nearby rail station for Washington, D.C., and it would be the same station where his remains would return in 1865, following his assassination in Ford's Theater. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Virginia, surrendered his forces to Union General Ulysses S. Grant, and it was time to begin rebuilding the nation. On the evening of April 14th, President Lincoln took a much-needed break to attend the play, Our American Cousin, at Ford's Theater with Mary and 2 other friends. As the play drew to a close, actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln as he sat in the presidential box. During the early 1900s, the theater was repurposed to offices and warehouse space, but today, Ford's Theater is a fully functioning theater, where anyone may spend an evening watching a play. While the rest of the house is filled with modern theatergoers, the presidential box where Abe and Mary sat has been reconstructed and remains empty, as a memorial to that fateful evening. The NPS preserves not just Lincoln's biography, but also his legacy, beginning with the Petersen House. After the shooting, aides moved the unconscious Lincoln to the Petersen House, located across the street from Ford's Theater. Reports conflict over if this decision was due to Lincoln's injury or safety concerns for those with him. Visitors can stand in the upstairs bedroom where Lincoln died and feel the gravitas of Edward M. Stanton's fateful proclamation, "Now he belongs to the ages." Continuing across Washington, D.C. from the Petersen House, one reaches the Lincoln Memorial. Architect Henry Bacon modeled the Lincoln Memorial after the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. Bacon felt that a memorial dedicated to a man who defended democracy should echo the birthplace of democracy. Among the towering monuments known to history are 36 Doric columns. This number represents the entire, though still broken, 1865 Union, while the symbol style cleverly represents Lincoln's humility. Additionally, inscribed on the frieze are the names of the 36 and the date each ratified the Constitution. The memorial's interior features a larger-than-life statue of President Lincoln, which took 4 years to complete, creating an atmosphere of quiet reflection and awe. The MPS shares sculptor David Chester French's intentions, noting French depicted the president as a worn but strong individual who endured many hardships, positioning Lincoln's hand in a manner that displayed his two leading qualities. One hand is clenched, representing his strength and determination. The other hand is more open, slightly more relaxed, representing his compassionate yet warm nature. Despite the symbolism in so many areas of the monument, the 57 granite steps leading to the reflecting pool are not symbolic at all. Some assume the number equals Lincoln's age at the time of his death. However, Lincoln was only 56 years old. Others may argue that Lincoln was in his 57th year when he died, but in actuality, there is no significance to the number other than the mathematical evenness of the rise between the steps. Another legacy memorial is Mount Rushmore National Memorial in South Dakota. Here, Lincoln represents the preservation of the nation and shares space with figures of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt, who represent the birth, growth, and development of the country respectively. However, creator Dwayne Robinson's original vision of these presidential legacies, immortalized in Black Hill stone that geologically dates back to over 1 billion years old, was merely to create a tourist attraction to draw people to rural South Dakota. Yes, it quite literally was a tourist trap. Originally, Goodson Borglum intended to include the heads and chests of each president, but the granite toppled schist could not support the carving, and the plan was abandoned, leaving only Washington's sculpture as a full bust. Theodore Roosevelt sits further back than planned because the rock of the mountain's face was severely fractured and needed excavating until a more substantial area was revealed. In FDR's 1933 restructuring, Mount Rushmore became part of the National Park System. Thanks to the care of the MPS, Robinson's vision has become a reality. In 2016, over 2.4 million people visited Mount Rushmore and the surrounding area. The final legacy memorial is actually a memorial to Lincoln's life. None of the others would have been possible without the Yellowstone National Park Act. President Ulysses S. Grant, whose promotion to leader of the Army of the Potomac was arguably one of Lincoln's most significant military decisions, and a catalyst for Grant's own election to the presidency, signed this 1872 act that the MPS states withdrew more than 2 million acres to be dedicated and set apart as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. The twist? Grant had based his decision on the Yosemite Grant Act of 1864, authorized by President Lincoln himself. Presenter Ford Cochran of the National Geographic and Great Courses lecture series, The Wonders of the National Park, notes, even as the Civil War raged back east, Abraham Lincoln took time to sign a bill that set aside Yosemite Valley, which he would not live to visit, and the nearby Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias in perpetuity under the state of California's management. Yosemite was the first national wonder in the U.S. designated by the federal government for eternal protection. Although we may think of Yosemite's feature El Capitan as a computer operating system, or Teddy Roosevelt as the creator of the first national park in Yellowstone, Wyoming, clearly Lincoln was ahead of everyone's time. He personally preserved what would become one of the crown jewels of the park system, Yosemite National Park. Author Wallace Stegner observed, "National parks are the best idea we've ever had. absolutely American, absolutely democratic, they reflect us at our best, rather than our worst. Among the park's best ideas is the preservation of the places that mark not just America's greatest wonders, but also our greatest people. The National Park Service's Administration of Historical, Cultural, and Natural Wonders of the United States allow every American to personally explore American history, including the life and legacy of America's 16th president.